County where Portland, Maine is located, where we have about 200 Master Gardener volunteers. But I also serve as co-chair of our statewide team. So I help kind of coordinate our statewide efforts with my colleague, Becca Long. And so I'm really excited to talk with you all about empowering Master Gardener volunteers as community educators today. And I also want to thank everyone who contributed to the survey that I did in the fall. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that survey in a moment. So Anne shared the plan for today, but just wanted to give you a snapshot of basically the purpose of today's presentation is to review the results from that Master Gardener Speakers Bureau survey, and then have some time at the end if anyone wanted to share anything about their program or ask any questions that could benefit the group. So basically, the survey that I had did in the fall actually served two purposes. I am in a graduate program that I'm finishing up, so I was able to work on a project that was related to work and to try to develop, basically collect a lot of information from what everyone's doing across the country with whether they have a Speakers Bureau program or something similar, and do a lot of research into most effective strategies for preparing volunteers to be speakers or presenters. And so by the end of the class I was in, I was able to develop a training outline, and now our team is working on implementing and kind of finishing that training so that we can launch it in the fall. But basically, this survey was done in the fall. There was about 33 survey participants, and that included county and statewide coordinators. And overall, about 20 states were represented. And in addition to the survey, I also interviewed two staff members as well as one volunteer who was coordinating a local Speakers Bureau program. So I was trying to get a good idea of like what's happening out there, and also realizing there's a lot of variation of what the program might look like for different states or counties, depending on the staff capacity or volunteer capacity that they have in that particular area. So I'm basically going to go through each of the survey questions and that I asked, and kind of provide a very brief summary of what everyone reported out on. And then at the end, I'll reshare that summary Google document that I sent out to the whole listserv. So you'll really find a lot more detailed information in that summary sheet, but this will kind of give you a snapshot of what was reported. So one of the first question was, who manages your Speakers Bureau program? And so overall, it seemed like volunteers played a big part in managing Speaker Bureau program. There was about half of the programs or participants, survey participants, the programs are managed by both staff and volunteers, and then about 36% was all volunteer managed, and then a smaller percentage of 15% were managed by staff. And then with that in mind, if you do have volunteers involved with managing the program, what is their involvement? What do they do? What kind of roles do they take on? And so overall, a lot of volunteers were involved with managing the speaker requests. So that included things like handling all communication with requesting organizations and or staff, assessing local needs, recruiting and scheduling the speakers, coordinating topics, dealing with equipment, if speakers needed equipment to use, such as a laptop or adapters for giving their presentation, tracking requests. And a lot of that involved having some sort of spreadsheet where you might be tracking the group or organization, the contact information, and also keeping tabs on previous requests that were received by the organization, and then the speakers that were matched with each of those requests. But beyond that, some volunteers also played a really important role in training and or mentoring speakers on presentation topics, as well as presentation styles, and assisted them with developing their presentations. They also helped with the program evaluation and tracking the impacts of the Speakers Bureau program. They played a role in developing and giving presentations. And some counties and states have a Speakers Bureau committee or a group of volunteers that help manage the program. In some cases, it might be an individual volunteer who's overseeing it, but sometimes there were committees that work together. Now, I'm not going to touch too much on presentation topics because you'll see in the summary sheet there were a lot of topics. So I didn't want to spend too much time on this, but basically the topics obviously depend on location throughout the country. Everything from growing produce to perennial gardening, soils and composting, basically a very wide range of topics. But the important thing to note here is that topics were selected based on surveying class participants, the volunteer's interests. So if the volunteer was developing a topic, they obviously want to work on a presentation or a presentation topic that is interesting to them. And then, of course, some programs would take public requests for presentation. So they might develop a presentation based on what they're hearing from the public. And then the next question, how much do you charge for a presentation? So I was actually a little surprised to see that many states don't charge anything, but they may accept an honorarium if somebody wanted to contribute a small amount of money. In some cases, some programs seem to accept gift card donations to cover the fuel for their master gardeners if they were traveling to give a presentation. And then there were some other amounts that were charged, $0 to $10, depending on the materials that were needed, $20 to $30, but only if supplies are needed for the actual talk. I think there was one program that said a minimum of $25, but then it would be an extra $25 for each additional hour. There were quite a few programs that charged $50, and in some cases they were charging a little bit extra beyond $50 if the presentation was going to be longer than 45 minutes, or if there were supplies needed for the presentation. And some people also requested a certain amount of money, but it was more of like a suggested donation as opposed to a required amount. And then I think there were a couple of programs that said $100, but they gave some exceptions for, county agencies or some nonprofits that there was no fee required for the presentation. And then for the format for presentations, it seemed like overall offering in-person or virtual presentations as having either of those options were pretty popular. And then it was about 42% that were just in-person programs that were offered through the Speakers Bureau program. And then I was really interested in knowing whether Master Gardener volunteers present alone and or in teams. And this question came out of some of the preliminary interviews I had with some staff to kind of understand their process and how taking a team approach would actually be beneficial for getting some new volunteers involved with the program. Overall, it seemed like most programs have volunteers present alone with the option to present in teams. Some programs highly encourage teams to present, and some of them actually use the team format to train new speakers. And that's something that I learned at the last conference, Extension Master Gardeners Conference, for one of the presentations I attended. It seemed like having people work up from being in a support role up to a presenter role was a good way to kind of train new speakers and help them feel prepared for giving presentations. Some programs take a team approach, similar to what I was just talking about, where there would be 1 to 2 volunteers who are presenting, while others are helping to sign people in, give handouts or whatever else might be distributed that day, and answer questions. So if you're having trouble recruiting volunteers for these different roles, kind of reducing people's fear of speaking by trying to take a team approach where they can kind of support each other might be a good way to go. And then some programs encourage or required volunteers to shadow an experienced presenter when they were new to the program. So the shadowing and mentorship seem to be a very common practice. And then how do you prepare Master Gardeners to give presentations? So there was a variety of strategies for training and preparing Master Gardeners to give presentations, from no training to plenty of support and training. So what I've done here is kind of start with like the least amount of support some programs provided, and then moving our way up to more support. So in some cases, no training was offered, but staff may vet or recruit speakers based off of, their relationship or interactions with those volunteers. For the most part, it seemed like a pretty universal practice that staff would review presentation materials. So if a volunteer created or adapted a presentation, they would be required to share that presentation with a staff member who would then review it and offer feedback. In some cases, volunteers helped fill this role too by reviewing presentations, but that was usually when they were, after they've received a lot of training on what to look out for. It wasn't a role that they would automatically be thrown into. And some programs provided resources like materials, equipment, any sort of, handouts that might be required. And some programs also have developed speaker guidelines or tip sheets that they would share with their Master Gardeners who are giving presentations. And then I mentioned the mentorship and shadowing earlier, and that seemed to be, there was a lot of iterations of what that looked like for different programs, but in some cases, there might be a one-on-one mentor for someone. In some cases, programs required their volunteers to continue to develop their presentation skills. So they would be required to, maybe at first shadow an experienced speaker, or even continue to go to other presentations or shadow someone to, hone in their presentation skills. Some programs have annual trainings, or they have workshops. There were a couple programs that offer a couple trainings throughout the year, but for the most part, it seemed like doing a training or workshop once a year was more common practice. The training could be a one-day thing, or it could have been multiple days over the course of like a week or a couple weeks. But that seemed to be a pretty common practice. And kind of going along with that, a lot of those programs that offered trainings would also require practice sessions. So many of the trainings, volunteers were developing their own presentation, and then they were required to practice in front of a group of their peers. And then there was only a couple, maybe even just one program that also provided extra training on subject matter. So a lot of the training we've been talking about so far is really on sort of the soft skills of giving presentations. What does an accessible PowerPoint or presentation look like? It's not really on the subject matter, although the volunteer in developing their presentation, they obviously do a lot of research and gain that skill. But this additional training is to sort of have staff help them develop their technical skills on a particular subject matter. And then sort of the more developed programs seem to fold in the Speakers Bureau training into their basic Master Gardener training. And so their basic Master Gardener training would include things like adult education or like adult learning theory. It would include things like presentation skills, because as we all know, a lot of those skills can be transferred to other parts of the Master Gardener program and the other type of volunteer work that Master Gardeners might do. A couple programs did utilize a end of the class project. So maybe it was a project they were working on throughout the entire basic training, or it wraps up with a certain project. But usually one of those options is to give a presentation. And then I was interested to know, because we all know that the demand for presentations and or horticulture knowledge is very high right now. I was kind of curious if people are trying to incentivize or get volunteers more actively involved in this type of volunteer work. So wanted to know whether it's required to give a presentation for your program. For the most part, most programs said no, not required for Master Gardeners to do a certain number of hours towards a Speakers Bureau program. But there were some exceptions. So one program may make it a requirement in the future. There were some programs that already have an outreach requirement. And then the Speakers Bureau counts as outreach. So that might be one way to incentivize people to do more community education. One program recommended that volunteers participate in one Speakers Bureau event, either as a speaker or a supporter. So that's a great way to sort of get people involved early on. And then there was one program that said that their Master Gardener volunteer interns, so I assume their new volunteers, need to complete 6 hours of volunteer service assisting or leading workshops or presentations in order to become certified. So that could be one way to kind of set the expectation very early on. So how are new presentations created? Most programs have volunteers develop presentations, or they'll use a presentation that is already developed. And like I said earlier, most programs have a staff review the presentations developed by volunteers before they're actually delivered. In some cases, like I said earlier, volunteers may also provide input if they are a highly trained and skilled volunteer that is, has the skills to provide that feedback. One program had the strict, educators develop the presentations, and then volunteers are to deliver the presentations. So there is that model as well, kind of depending on capacity of the organization. So with evaluation, I've divided it into two areas. I have tracking information and then sort of evaluation method. And this seemed like an area that a lot of programs wanted to improve upon. The things that were most commonly tracked were the number of requests received, the number of requests filled and talks given, and the number of attendees. Some programs did track other information, such as program reach, presentation topics, general feedback, organizations requesting talks, promotion, and future topics. So while there were a couple other things that were tracked, these top 3 items were the ones that were tracked most commonly among all programs. And then evaluation method, a lot of these are kind of similar. There were some programs that didn't have any sort of evaluation in place, or they're looking to develop this, but many people had post-class evaluation, which could take many forms. It was either a paper survey, a web link, or a QR code. Some people use more advanced surveys, such as Qualtrics, and some people even went even above and beyond and did an IRB approved evaluation. So this kind of varied a little bit depending on what the needs were. And then there was a question on the survey about how do you try to reach underserved audiences through your Speakers Bureau program? And so the most common approach was to partner with or advertise through another organization. So some of those organizations included community centers, public schools, libraries, senior centers, food banks, and shelters. And there were a couple of other techniques that programs use, such as actually bringing, instead of, trying to have underserved audiences or populations come to the extension office or wherever the program might be held, actually bringing those programs to the known underserved areas. And a lot of people would offer programming for free, or they would waive the program fee in order to boost and make their program more accessible to different groups. And I think it was just one program that said that they recruit bilingual speakers when possible, inviting community organizations serving underserved populations to request free talks. So that's one approach that would be helpful. A couple other notes though, this definitely seemed to be an area where a lot of people were looking to expand or develop more. Many programs don't actively seek out opportunities, or maybe they have another program such as Seed to Supper that kind of serves that purpose. So kind of looking more holistically at the programs that they offer through their extension office. Some of the common marketing outlets included extension websites, public events, local papers, radio, mailing lists, flyers, newsletters, and Facebook. So at the end, I had some general open-ended questions that brought up some challenges and successes that people experienced with managing their program. And some of the more common challenges, as I think a lot of us have experienced, is the limited number of volunteers who serve as speakers. And so a lot of times it's the same people doing the same talks. And so it can be hard to recruit new speakers to do talks. But then again, if you structure your program where that's a requirement or an encouragement, or creating kind of a system in which people can move up through the program and build their skills, that could be a way to try to recruit new speakers. For some people, collecting the program fee from the organization was challenging. And as I think we all experience, limited staff capacity can be difficult to really dedicate towards a program like this. And one other thing related to challenges, transporting equipment. So I had an interesting interview about that exactly, that one of the program coordinators explained to me that they don't do a lot of hands-on workshops because that adds another logistical thing that they have to figure out. So and also you could potentially lose some money in doing hands-on workshops, because if you're providing seeds and soil and containers, and then the registration numbers end up being really low and you already bought the supplies, then that's a cost that you need to consider. So for a lot of people, being able to just focus on basic presentations with props seemed to be the easier way to organize Speaker Bureau program. And then some successes. So I think I was a little personally surprised to see how just the level of involvement Master Gardeners are in managing the program. But I think that shows that when you have the right group of volunteers involved, then they really can be successful. And so this was one of the common themes that I saw in the survey, is that even with little organizational support, some volunteer groups were very successful in managing the program. And then another success, but also challenge, is that many of these Speakers Bureau programs are very popular. So most programs can't meet the public demand. And that could be a good thing if you're looking to potentially generate some revenue for your Master Gardener program. Even if you charge a small amount, that money could go directly back into your Master Gardener program. So that might be something to consider. So just a couple key takeaways, and then I have a couple training recommendations before we can open it up for discussion. But some of the key takeaways, both from the survey and also doing research into the literature on this, training is a very important aspect for developing successful speakers. So I think any amount of training that can be provided for speakers is definitely going to increase the skills and competencies to give presentations. Creating and practicing a presentation is essential for the learning of Master Gardeners and also for them to develop those skills to give effective presentations. And then, as I talked about earlier, volunteers play an important role in managing the program. So if you are in a state or county that has very limited capacity, you could look to identify key volunteers that might have the skill set to kind of help oversee and manage the program. And if you don't have those volunteers, it could be worth waiting until you have those right people in place to take that program to the next level. Effective staff and volunteer collaboration is important. So there's a lot going on with volunteers kind of working independently to develop the presentation or in groups, but then that coordination or collaboration that happens with the volunteer and staff member is really important to their success, and also to sort of develop that commitment to the program and the mission of what the program is intended to do. So just some things to think about if you're looking to develop or maybe enhance your current training. These are some of the aspects that seem to contribute to a more successful training. So including elements of adult learning theory, so characteristics of adult learners, and really for the Speakers Bureau program, I was mostly focusing on adult programs, not youth programs, but that can be helpful to fold into the basic training or maybe offering a separate Speakers Bureau training. Presentation and communication skills are really important. And obviously these skills go beyond just giving presentations. There's a lot of volunteers who have tables at community events, so those skills can translate to those situations as well. The one thing I forgot to add to this list is also overcoming fear of public speaking. That's also something that would be worth incorporating in a Speakers Bureau training that's being offered. And there's some really good resources around that out there. So accessibility is another important thing. So it's not just accessibility of PowerPoint slides, it's accessibility of the site. Visually, can people see the presentation and what you're doing? Can they hear what's going on? There's some really great checklists out there that other extensions have developed that could be a great reference for programs. And then when you're thinking about the training that you're developing, thinking about building in opportunities for reflection about someone's own experiences with giving presentations they've been to, having them reflect so that they can, increase their awareness of some of these key issues or skills around giving presentations. And through the survey and some of the interviews, it seemed like group or peer learning was also an effective strategy for many programs. People are motivated when they're learning among others or with others. And so even if, say, you do an online training, I think you can incorporate some of that peer learning in different ways, in a way that, will match the capacity of your program. And then experiential learning. So I feel like the developing so the planning, researching, and developing the presentation is experiential learning in itself. And that's like a really important part to for a volunteer presenter to go through all those stages so that they can understand how to develop an effective talk that will achieve the learning goals or outcomes that they hope to achieve. And really for the rest of this time, I'd really love to just, I know there were some things in the chat, see what questions there are, but also to have an opportunity for others to share or ask questions. I'm going to pull up that survey summary and I'll put it in the chat for everyone. And I will say I'm going to send out another survey that I would love everyone to contribute to, and I'll do another summary. So that one's going to be on risk management, but I'll follow up in an email about that. So thank you all.
Great. Thank you. That was really a lot of good information. Do you want me to go through the chat and read some of these, or if anybody has any comments on anything, they can unmute, or we can expand upon what was talked about in the chat?
Yeah, I'm fine if you want to
All right, let me
start
see.
in the chat and then see if anyone wants to chime in.
Yes, let me go to the top here. Okay. So, well, this was one of the questions that I had actually, about the fees. I guess and there was a couple of people that were interested in learning more about, how people were doing fees. We started doing individual fees to, hopefully increase attendance, so we would get lots of signups, but then people weren't showing, and so just a small amount to, encourage them to actually attend, not that we were trying to make money. And we just started that, so I don't know if anyone else has been successful doing that, or if they have any comment on fees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I saw Leslie's comment. I also was wondering if some people mistaken that question about fees for individual participation fees, because I thought some of them were oddly low, like the $0 to $10, which that could have been an individual fee. And so yeah, there's like a couple ways to think about it, because in some cases for speakers bureaus, like I think for a lot of people, it's for organizations or groups requesting a presenter. So you might be thinking about what you might charge that organization. Or it could be that Extension's putting on that program and there's a Master Gardener presenting. And then in that case, you have to think about individual entrance fees, which I didn't ask about in my slides. But I know I'll just chime in about Maine, and then if others want to chime in, we've had a lot of success in using a sliding scale. It kind of depends on the type of program, but for webinars, 0, $5, $10 works well. And then for in-person, we usually, like I know for us in Cumberland, we'll do for an hour and a half talk, it's $5, $10, $15. And then we always tell people to reach out if they are unable to afford any of those. So I love the sliding scale method, because it seems like overall whatever the middle number is kind of what it comes down to, the average of what people will pay. So yeah, I don't know if others want to chime in with what's worked for them.
Brianna, you have your hand up.
Yeah. So I'm over here in the Twin Cities, Minnesota area, and we have a couple different pay structures. We do a lot of collaborations through organizations. So we teach classes through like a partnership with a community ed group. And we do that with the library. We do that with Parks and Rec. And our payment structure is, if it's a private organization, we'll ask for an honorarium, because we don't charge for classes here. We ask for donations. But we'll ask for an honorarium, $100 for a private organization, like a garden club or a business. If it's a public organization, we ask for a donation back only if they charge the people who register for them. So for example, some community eds have to do a charge, because that's the only way the community ed structure gets to stay in business. So if they charge, they will give us a cut after they've met their needs to stay in operation. But if they don't charge anything, like the public libraries don't charge for classes, we don't charge for classes. So it is that sliding scale based on what they can do. But if we host a general class for the public, we currently don't charge, but I think we want to charge like $1, just a tiny amount for skin in the game, kind of like an app purchase is what we're trying to figure out if we can do that.
Yeah, we're doing something very similar with charging private groups a fee for their for us to come in and speak to their organization, like the garden clubs and things. And then yeah, I'm interested to know as far as fees. Also, you mentioned $1, but are you collecting that in person? Because we use Eventbrite, and so if you collect $5, like 3.5 of it's fees. So
All of our classes, you have to be registered before you show up. Like if somebody wanders into a library, we're not going to turn them away. But in order for us to show up, you have to register through the website, whichever tool it is. And we have a minimum number of people who are registered before we'll show up. And it depends whether it's an in-person class, like it's a much lower number for an in-person class than an online class because online registrations can skyrocket so quickly. Because we assume that no matter how many people register, a percentage just aren't going to come. But we need to make sure that we have more people to teach than we have volunteers coming to teach. Like that ratio needs to be offset. Otherwise, the volunteers have a definite morale hit with that. And that's sad to see.
anybody else have anything to share on fees, or I can go on to the next comments? Okay. Scroll back up again. There was some comments on partnering with other organizations. I'm not sure what Seed to Supper is, but is that an extension organization? And if so, does anybody partner with any organizations outside of extension?
I can actually speak to that because Oregon State University owns Seed to Supper. Hi, everyone. I'm new. I'm the statewide manager. And just yesterday we did a training for Seed to Supper. And so we learned that a lot of our local master gardeners who are offering Seed to Supper, which is a program for, we don't necessarily talk to the public about it this way, but for exceptionally low income folks with a priority equity communities. And it was developed by Oregon Food Bank of trans and gender expansive folks, immigrants and refugees, single moms and caregivers. And there's one other group I'm forgetting. Oh, BIPOC folks. And we do, that's free to everybody who participates, but we do try to promote it outside of our usual channels. And the reason for that is that we have had classes where people will show up who are middle class and then are sharing tips with other people in the class and showing pictures of their gardens that have thousands of dollars of materials in it. And so what we do is we try to partner with often with organizations that already have trust-based relationships in the community with the people that we would like to serve.
Cool. Anybody else have any other partnering agencies that they found effective for these types of programs? I know we just started partnering with, we have a program called Books and Cooks, and it's through New Worlds Reading. And so it's a reading and cooking initiative. And so they're targeting kids that have certain scores on reading tests. And so with that, we get families. And while it's focused on cooking, you can always bring the gardening side into that. So that's been pretty successful for us. And they usually have money for food and things like that too. Okay, great. Leslie, the link to the Seed for Supper. Okay, and so any state can take that and use that curriculum. Okay, that's cool.
And we encourage you to do so. Yeah, it'll undergo a major revision this year. because it's beginning to show its age a bit, but it's a good basic 6-week curriculum.
Oh, nice.
Growing vegetables on a budget.
That's awesome.
Can I speak?
Yes.
We partner with the health department because they have an email list already set up to go to the people that we're targeting. So we have a program where we're trying to encourage the kids to choose careers in agriculture, because this is a big agriculture community. And we're trying to promote vegetables, eating vegetables. So it's a big program where we have a partnership with the health department. We have a partnership with our university campus here in town, which isn't the main campus, and the ag center that's here in town, because that way we're reaching all of the goals that we have to promote agriculture and to promote eating vegetables.
Great. Oh, there's new messages. Let's see. Oh, good. Other places are offering seed to supper too. Cool. There is a question about, does anyone partner across county Master Gardener programs? So partnering with a neighboring county to offer something. Seems like a good way to take the, some of the burden off of you, as Pamela was talking about, starting up a program if you don't have the personnel to do it or volunteers.
We'll be, when we launch or pilot our program, we're still figuring out the details, but the training that we're going to do is going to be statewide, but then there's going to be some regional or local aspect to it, obviously, because the coordination needs to happen on a county level. People are getting equipment. So after we've run that a couple times, I'd be happy to share out on how that went for us. For those states that might be a little bit smaller and looking to sort of gain more capacity by sharing a lot of those resources. But as of now, I don't know how that'll work. So we'll see how it goes.
And I share all of our resources, not the projectors or any of that stuff, but any presentation that we finalize and vet, any handouts, useful tools, I'll pass them out to anybody who asks. And if a couple of our local counties have said, could you come and do a train the trainer presentation on your class about local food or your class about pollinators or composting? And then we treat that just like another class where we'll go into a different Master Gardeners county group and teach their volunteers how we teach. And then kind of perpetuate, they have the same materials, they've got a rough idea, and then they've got their own local contacts. So it's kind of a way of growing the network and getting the information out there.
That's great. And I know there were questions, I'm trying to find them in the chat, where people were asking about either in their state or counties or districts, sharing how people share presentations. Does anybody have any comments on good ways to share? I know it's hard to keep a database because stuff changes so much, you're always editing.
Yeah, in Minnesota, the statewide leadership came to the consensus that we will not maintain a database purely for that reason, but they have a list of county leads, and each county says we teach these classes with a list of topics. So you're welcome to call them up and say, hey, I see you have a class on rain gardens. Can I have it? That's not terribly successful, but it's there-ish.
Yeah, it's really hard to maintain a database that's always up to date. Everybody has to remember all the time to upload everything and all that. All right, anybody else have any last comments or anything for discussion? If I missed you from the chat, you can let me know. Okay. All right, so we're just gonna finish up. I think we got any questions, unless anybody had any last questions.
I actually have one
Oh,
quick
yeah.
comment. People were talking about how to find others' materials and whatnot. In my last position, I did a lot of work with open educational resources, and there is a site called OER Commons where anyone can share everything from PDFs to videos to Canvas course modules. And I would love to see more people sharing things openly or licensing things via Creative Commons so that we don't have to recreate the wheel, because I know I've learned firsthand how big our jobs are. And so it would be great to be able to reuse and remix things.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of the basic stuff, can cross multiple states, and, general botany is general botany wherever you go. So that's awesome. Yeah, if anybody has any links, you can put those in the chat and we'll grab them after the webinar and share them out in a follow-up email. And I just wanted to also make sure everybody knew that this would be recorded. Well, it is recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel. I put the link on the slide there. You can see that. You can also just type in, if you go to YouTube, extension Master Gardener Coordinators, and it's open and you can see all of the recordings from the past couple years that we've had in there. And so we'll post those in there. And then this is the link for the National EMG Coordinators News Blast. So make sure you're on the list for that, and it will remind you of webinars that are coming up, along with other important information, the announcements, if there's updates on any of that sort of thing as well. And then just make sure you've signed up to attend our webinars. We have some really great programming this year. So you can sign up for all of those in Zoom, and it's every other month. So we'll be back here in June with our next webinar. And so thank you so much to Pamela for sharing today. When I first saw the survey, I thought it was really helpful, and I love sharing all of that information. So I look forward to opening up the document again and looking at the detail, and thanks for everyone for sharing today. And we appreciate you attending, and we will see you next webinar.